Welcome to True Echo, where powerful stories break silence and expose truth. In today's tale, a young black woman walks into a corporate lobby, expecting a job interview. Instead, she's ignored, dismissed, and left waiting for hours, until the people who really matter show up. What happens next flips the entire power dynamic upside down. Stay with us, because this is a story of quiet dignity, delayed justice, and a rise no one saw coming. If Danielle Mlan had known how the morning was going to unfold, she would have worn her low, padded pumps. But she'd picked the sharp black heels, the ones that added just enough height and just enough presence to make an impression. They were made for boardrooms, not waiting rooms. Yet here she was, standing outside Westbridge Corporate Plaza under the Arizona sun, her tailored slate blazer catching glints of morning light, portfolio snug under her arm. This meeting could change everything. She walked through the towering glass doors at 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes early, just as she was raised to do. Early is on time and on time is late, her father used to say. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and designer cologne. Art pieces hung on the walls like trophies, and the receptionist's desk gleamed like it had never known dust. Danielle approached with quiet confidence. "Hi, I'm Danielle Mlan. I have a 10 a.m. with Craig Ellison." The receptionist, blonde, gum barely visible in her cheek, tapped her keyboard with a perfect red nail. "Mr. Ellison said he'll be right with you. Please have a seat." Danielle smiled, gave a polite nod, and walked over to the row of leather chairs by the window. She sat with poise, crossing her legs, laying her portfolio carefully across her lap. She double-checked her notes on her phone, questions prepped, data memorized, research done. She was ready. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. No big deal. Meetings run late. By 10:40 she shifted in her seat, straightening her back. The receptionist hadn't looked up once. Danielle approached again, voice even, still professional. "Hi, just wondering if Mr. Ellison is still available? He's just wrapping up a call. He'll be right with you." The same words, the same fake smile. Danielle returned to her seat, this time with a slight tension in her jaw. She saw two white men in golf polos walk in, greeted immediately, offered coffee, ushered past the glass doors with handshakes and banter. She told herself not to assume. Not yet. Still, the knot in her stomach tightened. Her fingers toyed with the edges of her skirt. This wasn't impatience. It was something else. Something deeper. At 11:15, her back ached from the rigid chair. Her posture remained flawless. But no one noticed. No one even looked at her. It was like she didn't exist, except to the janitor who passed with a mop and gave her a small, silent nod. That moment of recognition felt more real than anything else in the room. At 11:30, she approached the desk again. "I'm wondering if I should reschedule," she said, polite but firm. "It's been quite a while." The receptionist blinked at her like she'd just emerged from the wallpaper. "Oh, he's still finishing up. Shouldn't be long." Still the same line. The same nothing. Danielle returned to her seat, but her heart was pounding now. Her skin prickled with shame she didn't deserve. The anger was there, but she pressed it down. She wouldn't let it show. Not here. Not now. She remembered her mother's words, ones that once felt too harsh to be true. "You gotta be twice as good to get half as far." She opened her portfolio again, pretending to read. But the words blurred. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from restraint. And then, at 11:50 a.m., she saw him. Craig Ellison. Tall, smug, talking to another manager as if nothing in the world needed his attention. He glanced toward the lobby but didn't see her, or chose not to. He laughed. He walked away. Danielle blinked slowly once, then twice. Something inside her cracked, but not in a way that broke. It was a crack that let light in. She stayed seated. She didn't leave. Because Danielle Mlan didn't quit. Not when she had spent years preparing for this very moment. Not when she had earned her place here with every sleepless night, every unpaid internship, every thankless project labeled team effort that she carried on her back alone. She stayed. And then, at 11:58 a.m., the front doors opened. 5 professionals strode in, heels clicking, suits tailored to precision. The room shifted. Energy sharpened. Conversations hushed. Danielle looked up and recognized them immediately. Martin Beasley, CO. Sandra Whitlock, Senior Director of Finance. 3 others from the board. And then, Sandra's eyes locked onto Danielle's. "Danielle Mlan," she said, surprised and warm, her voice ringing across the lobby. Every head turned, including Craig Ellison's. Danielle stood slowly, measured, composed. portfolio under her arm like a sword she'd earned the right to carry. The weight of every unseen moment shifted in the air the moment Sandra Whitlock said her name. Danielle Mlan. The warmth in her voice sliced through the sterile atmosphere like sunlight cutting through fog. It wasn't just recognition, it was affirmation. Suddenly Danielle wasn't invisible. She wasn't just a name on a forgotten list. She was someone in a place where people like her were too often treated like no one. Heads turned. Whispers hushed. The receptionist's expression dropped from disinterest to sheer panic. Craig Ellison, standing across the lobby, looked up too late. He blinked again, and then straightened his shoulders like a man trying to salvage what little dignity he had left. Sandra was already striding toward Danielle with a warm smile. Martin Beasley followed, offering his hand even before she could extend hers. "It's good to see you again, Danielle," he said, his grip firm but respectful. "We were just talking about you last week. Your presentation at the Leadership Summit? Outstanding." Danielle smiled, controlled but gracious. She met his eyes and replied with the clarity and poise she'd been holding on to all morning. "Thank you, Mr. Beasley. That means a lot." Craig was moving now, fast. His dress shoes tapped hard against the polished floor as he rushed toward the group. His smile was forced, his voice a touch too loud, the kind of brightness that only made the awkwardness louder. "Danielle," he exclaimed, almost breathless. I'm so sorry for the delay. We had an unexpected, situation come up. Totally unacceptable, I know. I sincerely apologize." Danielle turned to him, her expression unreadable. A smooth mask of professionalism. Her voice was cool, steady, and devastatingly precise. 2 hours is a long time for a situation, Mr. Ellison." Her tone didn't accuse. It didn't plead. It simply stated the fact, and that was what made it sting. Craig's smile faltered. His lips parted slightly, then closed again. Behind him, the receptionist fumbled with her keyboard like it might offer a place to hide. Martin Beasley raised an eyebrow subtly. Sandra crossed her arms and studied Craig like a teacher watching a student try to bluff his way through a question he clearly hadn't studied for. "We'd love to pick your brain on a few things, Danielle," Sandra said, cutting the silence with purpose. "If you've got time, why don't you come up to the executive conference room with us?" Danielle nodded, slipping her portfolio under her arm like armor. "I'd be happy to." Craig tried to insert himself again. I can take her things up, get her a coffee, anything she needs." But Danielle didn't even turn. She pivoted with grace, naturally falling into step with Sandra and Martin as they walked toward the elevator. Craig stood there, visibly deflated, stranded like a man who just realized the train had left and he wasn't on it. Danielle didn't look back, but she could feel his humiliation burning against her back like the Arizona sun. As the elevator doors slid open and the group stepped inside, Danielle exhaled, quietly but completely. It wasn't relief, not exactly. It was release. All the tension, all the quiet fury, all the pain of being ignored had been building to this moment. And now, without theatrics or revenge, she was exactly where she belonged, moving upward. Inside the executive conference room, everything was different. The air didn't buzz with pretense. It hummed with potential. Martin slid a folder across the table toward her. "Timelines. Budget approvals. Plans. Real ones. We're developing a new leadership initiative," he explained. "After your summit keynote, we thought you'd be the perfect person to help shape it." Danielle blinked once, absorbing it all. Not a pitch. Not an interview. An offer. Her questions were sharp. Her suggestions bolder. And they listened, not out of politeness but with real respect. This wasn't just a meeting anymore. This was alignment. Across the glass hallway she saw Craig again, hovering near his office like a ghost of missed chances. He looked toward the room more than once, eyes flickering like he was trying to figure out how he'd lost control of the narrative so completely. How the woman he hadn't bothered to acknowledge that morning was now seated at the very table he was once proud to serve. Danielle didn't flinch. She met his glance once, no emotion, no gloating. Just presence. The kind that says, "I see you. I'm just not interested in explaining myself to you." An hour later, Martin stood and shook her hand again. "Think it over," he said, voice low but sincere. "But personally, I'd love to see you in this role." As Danielle gathered her things, Sandra walked her to the door, her voice soft but firm. "If you ever run into anything like today again," she said, "don't go through channels. Come straight to me. No middlemen." Danielle smiled. This one was real, soft, quiet, full of something deeper than triumph. "Thank you, Sandra. I'll remember that." The elevator doors closed behind her, leaving Craig Ellison behind with nothing but his excuses and regret. Danielle stepped out of the elevator onto the ground floor of Westbridge Corporate Plaza with a grace that hadn't wavered since her name echoed across the lobby. But this time, her poise came not from necessity, not from survival, but from something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks: validation. Not just a nod, not just a hand on the shoulder or a well-meaning "you're doing great." This was different. This was being seen, heard, invited in. As she walked past the receptionist desk, the woman who had dismissed her just hours earlier avoided her gaze. Danielle didn't stop, didn't speak. She no longer needed to. Outside, the sun was bright and merciless, the Arizona air dry enough to pull the sweat straight from your skin. Danielle crossed the plaza slowly, each step more grounded than the last. Her heels no longer hurt. Funny how the body follows the mind. She reached her car, slid inside and sat there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. It had happened. After all the late nights, the overlooked emails, the meetings where her voice was talked over, the colleagues who took her ideas and repackaged them with louder voices, this had happened. And not because someone handed it to her. Because she stayed. Because she knew who she was even when no one else seemed to. That evening, as she sipped a glass of red wine in her quiet apartment, her phone buzzed with a new email notification. The subject line made her sit up straighter. Offer, Strategic Leadership Advisor, Initiative Phase 1. Her eyes skimmed the content. Salary proposal, project outline, timeline expectations, and an invitation to meet with HR next Monday to begin onboarding. The position wasn't just advisory. It came with autonomy, influence, visibility. There was a seat at the table, finally. She stared at the screen for a long time, letting the weight of the moment settle over her. And then, slowly she smiled. A small private thing. No fireworks, no dancing. Just the quiet certainty that her voice could no longer be ignored. But while Danielle's world was expanding, Craig Ellison's was beginning to shrink. Inside Westbridge's upper management corridors, word traveled faster than official memos ever could. The lobby incident wasn't just noticed. It was talked about, with raised eyebrows and hushed voices. Did you hear Sandra's tone when she invited Danielle up? I heard Martin was furious. Said something about setting the wrong tone for leadership. Apparently she waited 2 hours. 2 hours? Craig's name started floating through conversations like a cautionary tale. Managers, even those who once envied his confidence, began to keep their distance. Interns whispered about him in elevators. HR, always silent on personnel issues, scheduled a review session with him for Friday afternoon. No one said it outright, but everyone knew. The tides were shifting. By the end of the week, Craig Ellison's nameplate had disappeared from his door. No public announcement, no farewell party. Just gone. Danielle heard about it from a former colleague who messaged her on LinkedIn with a cryptic. Guess who finally got checked? She didn't respond. Not because she didn't care. But because the victory wasn't his fall. The real victory was in what came next. Monday morning, Danielle walked back into Westbridge, this time through the executive entrance. No receptionist told her to wait. No one averted their gaze. In fact, as she stepped into the glass-walled conference room, every head turned. She took her place at the head of the long table. Her blouse crisp white, her skirt the same slate gray as the morning she waited in the lobby, though now it felt like armor. She clicked the remote and the screen behind her flickered to life. Good ideas don't care where they come from, she said, her voice calm but cutting. And neither should we. Silence followed, but not the cold, dismissive kind. This was a silence of attention. Of acknowledgement. She had them. All of them. And not because someone had made a scene for her, but because she had turned her patience into power. The presentation flowed. Questions came. Respectful, engaged. No interruptions. No dismissals. When she finished, several team leads approached her, not with pleasantries but with ideas. Wanting to collaborate, to join in, to build something. Later that afternoon, Sandra stopped by her office. A temporary one for now, but soon to be permanent. Board loved you, she said, leaning against the doorframe. Martin said you were the highlight of the quarter. Danielle looked up from her notes. I'm just doing what I came here to do. Sandra smiled. That's exactly why you're here. There was a pause, then something unspoken passed between them. An understanding. Sandra knew what it meant to be underestimated too. Maybe not in all the same ways, but enough to recognize the fire behind Danielle's composed exterior. Before Sandra left, she added, almost casually, "Oh, and just so you know, HR received 2 complaints this week. Not about you. About the treatment you received that day. Looks like some folks were paying attention." Danielle's mouth curled into a soft smile. Not because she wanted anyone punished, but because accountability had finally entered the building. By the end of her second week, Danielle Mlan had become more than just a name at Westbridge. She had become a presence. A force. Not loud, not boastful, but undeniable. She walked the halls with purpose, not urgency. Colleagues who once dismissed her with curt nods now stopped to ask questions, pitch ideas, invite her into conversations that, just weeks ago, would have happened over her head or behind closed doors. But Danielle hadn't come just to be noticed. She had come to build. The new initiative, Project Helix as Martin Beasley had dubbed it, was more than a token leadership program. It aimed to transform Westbridge's culture from the inside out. No more shadow committees. No more exclusion behind smiling faces. It was about structural change, sustainable growth, and amplifying underrepresented voices, without asking them to shrink to fit in. Danielle's role was central. She was no longer waiting for the invitation. She was writing it. Every day brought more responsibility. Strategic planning. Budget approval reviews. Cultural audit reports. Meetings with VPs and department heads. And yet, Danielle kept a mental post-it note tacked to the inside of her spirit. You are not here to prove. You are here to lead. Still, not everyone adjusted so easily to her assent. Some in upper management tiptoed around her, unsure how to reconcile the image of the woman who had once sat quietly in their lobby with the strategist now shaping the company's future. Others, mostly those who had climbed ladders built on familiarity and handshakes, watched her rise with the kind of quiet resentment that lingers behind professional smiles. But Danielle knew this tension was familiar. It was the same undercurrent she'd felt in college classrooms when she was the only black woman with a 4.0 in economics. The same unease in networking events when her name was mispronounced 3 times before someone asked her where she was really from. So she handled it the way she always had, with excellence. In mid-April, Danielle hosted the first official roundtable for Project Helix. It was an internal summit, bringing together junior analysts, interns, and department leads who had often been left out of key decision-making circles. The goal was simple: listen first, then lead. She watched as ideas poured from employees who had never spoken in front of executives before. One young Latina engineer proposed a company-wide mentorship program. A soft-spoken analytics intern outlined a real-time feedback app for internal operations. Danielle didn't just nod, she took notes. She asked follow-up questions. She made them feel heard. Because she remembered exactly what it felt like to be brilliant and invisible. After the session, Martin Beasley pulled her aside. "You've started something here," he said. "It's more than a project now. It's a shift." Danielle nodded. "Then let's keep pushing." Meanwhile, in a quieter wing of the building, the absence of Craig Ellison was beginning to feel more permanent. His former office had been reassigned, his name scrubbed from directories, his legacy reduced to a cautionary whisper among staff. Some still speculated that he might reappear at a rival firm, or pivot into consulting. But others, especially the assistants and junior staff who remembered being brushed aside by him, weren't so sure. Danielle never mentioned Craig. Not publicly. Not in passing. To her, the point had never been about him. But one morning, as she rode the elevator to a leadership meeting, a former HR liaison stepped in beside her. Mid-40s, wiry frame, glasses perched too low on her nose. "You know," the woman said, adjusting her ID badge, "we've seen a lot of turnover lately. Some people didn't think we'd notice." But it only took one moment to shift the narrative. Danielle turned slightly. "One moment." "That lobby," the woman said, glancing up. "Some of us saw it. What happened to you? That wasn't the first time something like that happened here. But it was the last time it went unnoticed." The elevator doors opened before Danielle could reply. But she didn't need to. They both understood. Later that week, as Danielle reviewed applications for the mentorship lead, one of the new positions funded under Project Helix, she came across a familiar name, Nia Thompson. Her heart skipped. Nia had been her first-year mentee back in grad school. A brilliant, fierce thinker with a sharp tongue and a softer heart. They'd lost touch after graduation, but Danielle remembered Nia's hunger. Her need to belong without compromise. She scheduled an interview the next day. When Nia walked in, braids freshly done, suit sharp, eyes wide with disbelief, they both paused for a moment before bursting into quiet laughter. "I can't believe it," Nia said, hugging her. "When I saw your name on the contact email, I thought, there's no way." Danielle grinned. "There's always a way. Sometimes you just have to wait long enough for the door to open, and be ready to walk through it when it does." The interview was a formality. Mia was a lock. But Danielle still asked the hard questions, because she knew what came next wouldn't be easy. Change never was. That evening, as she locked up her office, Danielle looked out the window toward the city skyline. Lights flickered in tall buildings. Somewhere down below, a young woman like her was probably sitting in another polished lobby, legs crossed, portfolio in lap, being told to wait. But things were different now because Danielle was here. And because she remembered. It was a rare quiet morning when Danielle arrived early, before even the cleaning staff had turned off the alarm system. She liked it that way sometimes. The silence gave her space to think, to breathe without eyes on her. It wasn't that she feared scrutiny. Not anymore. But there was something sacred about solitude in a space she had once felt excluded from. She walked through the glass doors of the executive floor, heels soft against the carpet. Her office lights flickered on with a gentle hum. On her desk, a steaming cup of coffee already waited, courtesy of the new administrative assistant, Asha, a young black woman who reminded Danielle of herself 5 years ago, eager, brilliant, just looking for one person to bet on her. Danielle had bet on her first week. By 9:15 a.m. the floor was bustling. Emails chimed. Meeting rooms filled. Asha peeked in with a reminder, the CEO's roundtable starts in 15. You're leading the second segment. Danielle nodded, glancing at her notes. It wasn't nerves she felt, it was anticipation. The kind you get when you know something important is about to take root. The roundtable was one of Martin Beasley's recent mandates, an effort to bring department heads, rising talent and project leads into a shared space every quarter to strategize and sync. But this time was different. This time, Danielle had crafted the agenda. She opened the session with clarity and calm. We can't innovate with closed doors and closed minds, she said, her eyes scanning the room. Leadership isn't about who talks loudest, it's about who listens best. And today, I want us all to listen. The conversations that followed were electric. Danielle watched as junior associates challenged directors, with data to back it up. As longtime managers admitted gaps in their approach and asked for feedback. As the shyest participant in the room, an operations analyst named Ravi, proposed an AI-driven system to reduce internal communication delays, and got a literal round of applause. It was everything she had hoped for. But not everyone was clapping. Midway through the session, Danielle noticed a new face in the back, seated near the catering table, arms folded tight across his chest. White man, late 40s, stiff gray suit, badge clipped cleanly to his lapel. Thomas Kinney, Regional Director, Chicago Division. She had heard the name before, once maybe twice. Known for old-school methods. Had a reputation for undermining younger executives, especially women. She clocked his expression with one glance, skeptical, sizing her up like she was a disruptive upgrade he hadn't signed off on. After the session, as attendees mingled, Kinney approached her. You ran a tight session, he said. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Thank you, Danielle replied evenly, shaking his hand. I'll be honest, he continued, voice lower. Not sure all this inclusive leadership talk is scalable. In the real world, someone has to give orders. Danielle didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, then said, and in the real world, orders work better when the people receiving them feel seen. Kinney's smile faded. He gave a tight nod and turned away. It wasn't the first time Danielle had faced a subtle challenge. But something about his tone lingered longer than she liked. Later that day, as she met with Sandra Whitlock to debrief, Danielle brought it up. Thomas Kinney, she said simply. Sandra's brow lifted. Ah, so he made his presence known? Not directly. Just shadow games. Sandra leaned back in her chair. Watch him. He plays chess. But he underestimates queens. The comment made Danielle smile. But the warning was clear. The following week, Danielle received an unexpected invitation, a regional strategy review panel hosted by Kinney's division in Chicago. She was asked to present a progress update on Project Helix and speak on talent pipeline sustainability. It could have been a trap. Or it could be the moment she turned suspicion into substance. She chose the latter. In the days leading up to the presentation, Danielle worked harder than she had since grad school. She pulled data, drafted narratives, built a cross-regional comparison that highlighted Westbridge's exponential growth since Helix's implementation. She didn't just show numbers, she showed stories. Faces. Results. When she landed in Chicago and stepped into the Kinney-led conference room, she knew she was walking into a space designed to test her. And she was ready. 45 minutes. That's how long she spoke. No notes. No filler. Just clarity. When she finished, the room was silent, but not cold. It was the silence of impact. And then applause. Even Kinney clapped reluctantly. He didn't compliment her. But he didn't challenge her either. And that, from him, was an admission of defeat. Afterward, 2 VPs pulled her aside to talk collaboration. A third asked if she'd consider overseeing a joint task force. Danielle took it all in stride, but inside something shifted. She realized something vital. This wasn't just about Project Helix. This was about trust. About presence. About ownership. And she had earned it. When she returned to Arizona, a bouquet waited at her desk. A note attached in Sandra's handwriting. He played the game. You rewrote the rules. Danielle tucked the note into her drawer. She didn't need flowers. She had something better. Momentum. The sun burned high over Scottsdale as April melted into May, but inside Westbridge's towering glass structure, the heat wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the shifting center of gravity, and Danielle Mlan had become its axis. What had started as a leadership initiative had transformed into something far more disruptive. Project Helix had become a movement, gradually dismantling the unspoken hierarchies that had dictated who got heard, who got promoted, and who got quietly left behind. It wasn't just policies Danielle changed. It was perception. And that terrified some people. She noticed it in small ways. Hesitations in email replies. Passive-aggressive pushback in meetings. Whispers that she was moving too fast, that the culture wasn't ready. But Danielle had been black and brilliant in corporate America long enough to know exactly what those euphemisms meant. So she didn't slow down. She expanded. With Sandra and Martin's backing, she proposed a cross-regional collaboration lab, bringing together high-potential talent from offices across the country to build scalable solutions. It would give interns and overlooked employees the chance to lead short-term task forces, rotate between departments, and pitch directly to executives. It was radical. It was overdue. And it passed. But the same week the lab was approved, an anonymous memo began circulating through internal channels. No sender. No signature. Just a 2-page diatribe against what it called corporate diversity showboating. It questioned Danielle's qualifications. Mocked Project Helix as a social experiment. Claimed merit was being replaced by optics. Danielle read it late one night, alone in her office. At first her hands shook. Not from fear, but from sheer fury. She hadn't worked this hard, stayed this poised, delivered this many results, just to be reduced to a diversity checkbox. But then she exhaled. She remembered her mother's voice again. Baby girl, if they're not talking, you're not walking loud enough. The next morning she called a town hall. Voluntary attendance. Standing room only. She walked onto the stage, not as a victim, not even as a target, but as a leader. Some of you may have read the anonymous letter that's been passed around, she began, her tone firm but calm. I'm not here to defend myself. Because the truth doesn't need defense, it needs visibility. She paused, letting the silence settle. I was hired to lead and I've done exactly that. Not with slogans. With results. Since Helix began, employee satisfaction has increased by 38%. Time to promotion for non-traditional candidates has shortened by 20%. And more importantly, for the first time, people from every floor, not just the top, are shaping this company's future. She looked directly into the crowd. If someone has a concern about that, they should sign their name next time. I did. A hush fell. Then a swell of applause, genuine, sustained, uncontainable. From that moment on, the Whisper campaign died. Not because it was publicly shamed, but because it was rendered irrelevant. Danielle had stepped out of the waiting room, and into the spotlight. Yet amid the noise, something personal was brewing. That same week an email arrived in her inbox. The subject line. Speaking request, Howard University Women in Leadership Summit. They wanted her to keynote. Not just attend. Open the event. She stared at the screen for a moment too long, her throat tightening. She thought of herself at 21, sitting in a classroom with peeling walls, writing speeches she never imagined she'd actually give. She replied, yes, with honor. In the days leading up to the summit, her schedule overflowed. Strategy meetings, interviews, performance reviews. But she made time. Because this wasn't just another event. This was her origin story coming full circle. She flew to D.C. on a Thursday night, the city humming beneath her window. On Friday morning, she stepped onto the stage in a navy blue suit, microphone clipped, lights soft around her. The crowd of young black women leaned forward, phones ready, eyes bright. Danielle took a breath. 10 years ago, she began, I waited 2 hours in a corporate lobby. No explanation. No apology. I was invisible. Pause. But I didn't walk out. I stayed. And 3 hours later, I was invited into a room I was never supposed to see. I didn't just earn a seat at the table. I built my own. Laughter. Applause. Some tears. And here's the truth I want you to carry, she said, voice rising. You don't have to be perfect to deserve a place. You don't have to wait for someone to call your name. You're the call. You're the change. Don't let this world shrink you. Expand anyway. By the time she stepped off stage, her inbox was overflowing. Corporate sponsors. Media requests. Job offers she hadn't asked for. But none of it compared to the moment she spotted a girl in the crowd, maybe 19, maybe 20, holding a handmade sign that read, I waited in the lobby too. Danielle's eyes burned. Not with sadness. With purpose. Back in Scottsdale, she returned to a company that no longer looked the same. And neither did she. She was no longer climbing. She was anchoring. The morning after Danielle returned from the Howard University summit, her office was flooded with light. The blinds were drawn back, the air smelled faintly of eucalyptus from a new diffuser Asha had installed, and a fresh stack of proposals waited neatly on her desk. But the one thing Danielle noticed first, the one thing that didn't belong, was the envelope. Not an email. Not a scheduled calendar ping. An actual envelope. Hand-delivered. No name on the front. Just her title in sharp, neat lettering. D. Mlan, Executive Strategy Advisor. She opened it carefully. Inside, a single sheet of Westbridge letterhead. The signature at the bottom stopped her heart for half a beat. Thomas Kinney. The message was brief but not cold. I may have misjudged you. Let's talk. TK. Danielle stared at the note for a long time. It didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a pivot. An old dog lifting its head to sniff the wind and realizing a storm was no longer coming. It had arrived. She scheduled the meeting. Not to smooth things over, but to finish what had started that day in the lobby. They met in the executive lounge, neutral ground. Kinney arrived 5 minutes early, which she noted. He stood as she entered and offered a handshake. She took it. He gestured toward the table. I'll keep this short. Please, she said. Do. He nodded. When I first heard about Project Helix, I thought it was noise. Window dressing. Feel-good fluff with no spine. Danielle didn't blink. And now, Kinney said, I've seen what happens when people feel seen. I've read the performance metrics. More importantly, I've seen how you move. How others follow. She tilted her head slightly, waiting. I'm not here to apologize, he said. That's not my style. She smiled faintly. Good. I'm not here to accept one. That stopped him, and then, slowly, he smiled too. Fair enough. He leaned forward, lacing his fingers. I want in. The words hung in the air like a dare. Danielle didn't answer right away. She studied him. This man who once represented everything immovable about corporate tradition. Now, sitting before her, humbled not by scandal but by proof. After a long pause, she said, You don't get to lead this. But you can support it. Kinney nodded. Understood. And just like that, the old guard took a step back and opened the door for something new. By summer, Project Helix had expanded into 3 new regions. Danielle's task force had grown to include over 40 rising leaders, half of whom had never been in a boardroom before. The mentorship pipeline was thriving. Promotion rates for marginalized employees had doubled. Retention was up. Morale was high. But Danielle wasn't finished. She proposed one final addition to Helix, a justice clause. A company-wide requirement that every senior manager undergo bias training not just once, but quarterly, with measurable outcomes tied to bonus eligibility. It was bold. It was risky. And it passed. Unanimously. Not because everyone believed in it yet, but because no one wanted to be the person who publicly opposed it. That was a victory too. And then came the unexpected. Danielle was offered a new position. Not just a raise. Not just a promotion. Chief Innovation Officer. Global. The youngest ever. The first black woman in Westbridge's history to hold a C-suite role. When the offer landed in her inbox, she didn't react right away. She simply sat still, the cursor blinking at her like a heartbeat. It wasn't validation she felt. It was vindication. But not for herself alone. It was for every girl who had waited in a lobby, knees tight, voice rehearsed, while the world ignored her presence. It was for every brilliant mind dismissed as too bold, too quiet, too other. And it was for that version of herself who sat for 2 silent hours, being reminded she wasn't supposed to be anything more than a name they forgot to call. On her first day as CIO, Danielle wore the same slate gray skirt and white blouse from that unforgettable morning. Not as a costume, but as armor, as history. Before walking into the boardroom, she stood outside the same glass lobby, watching the receptionist desk. A new girl sat there now. Young, wide-eyed, black. Danielle approached her with a warm smile. "You doing okay today?" she asked. The girl blinked, surprised. "Why, yes, thank you." Danielle handed her a sealed envelope with a gold-stamped Westbridge seal. "What's this?" the girl asked. Danielle winked. "Your invitation to the next level. Don't wait for someone to see you. Show them." She turned and walked into the future. Sometimes the strongest power comes not from raising your voice, but from refusing to leave quietly. Danielle Mlan didn't just endure injustice. She transformed it into a movement. Her story is a reminder that even the most polished glass ceilings shatter when one woman decides to stop waiting for permission. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share it. Talk about it. And most of all, believe in the worth you carry before anyone else does. Your value doesn't begin when others recognize it. It begins when you do. Subscribe to True Echo for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and transformation. Drop a comment if you've ever felt unseen, because your voice belongs in the room.